Cultivating Calmness Podcast. I'm your host, Kaela Vance, and today I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness. I recently was looking up some information and I was reminded of several quotes that I use in sessions with people when I talk about forgiveness, or sometimes we'll call it unforgiveness, and some personal stories as well as stories that I have learned in the past from people who have offered forgiveness. And I just wanted to talk about that today and share it with you. So thank you for being here with me. If you follow it all, I talk a lot about a lot of different subjects. I try to relate everything back to mental health in some way, though sometimes I will talk about more holistic health type subjects. I believe, last week I talked about vitamin D and the importance of vitamin D, and I am actually so happy that almost every day, I think maybe every day, for the month of February so far, and I know we're on the 7th day of February, we've had sun every day, so that's amazing. Seeing as January in Ohio, we had, from what the reporters say, the news weathermen say, I think we had 1 day of sun in the whole month of January, which was 3 days less than what is normal for Ohio. Now, I wasn't quite sure if that was a full day of sun, like on the 11th of January, the sun was out all day, or if they just compiled all the, hours of sun for the month of January and it equaled 1 day, because I know I saw the sun in January, but it would be for very short periods of time. So that's just related to last week. So I have been outside getting my sunlight on my face this week, and even though it's a bit chilly outside, getting that sunlight because it is amazing. It feels so good, and it definitely boosts our immune system and boosts our mood. So I encourage you to get outside if you haven't. So back to forgiveness. What is forgiveness really? There are a lot of misconceptions, I think, about what forgiveness is. So we'll start with a simple, definition. A lot of times when you look up definition, forgiveness is in, or the word forgive is in the definition, so that doesn't help us to understand. But the best one that I found to be helpful, is that it's an intentional decision to let go of resentment and anger or other, negative emotions that you may be experiencing because of an act or, something that happened, between you and someone else, or even for yourself. So thinking about that when we talk about forgiveness, that it is an intentional decision, something that you decide to do to let go of the resentment and anger that you may be holding on to. So if you've ever thought about something that you have difficulty letting go of, we'll talk about that a little bit. Letting go. Does letting go mean forgetting? Does letting go mean condoning? Does letting go mean that you now have to be friends with this person, or you have to be okay with what they did? The answer is no. You don't have to do any of those things, and it definitely does not mean that you are forgetting what happened. In fact, I wouldn't want you to forget what happened, because it's a learning opportunity for you and maybe other people to not forget. However, do you really want to be carrying around the burden of those feelings that you have? So some examples you may hear when we talk about forgiveness and unforgiveness is some of the extremes, right? Somebody murdered my family member. How can I forgive them for that? You're right. That would be a very difficult task to do, to forgive somebody for killing one of your family members and taking them away from you. I guess the question is, would you rather carry around the burden of that anger and that hate and that resentment and that frustration you have towards that person? Or would you rather decide that, I obviously don't like what they did. I am very hurt and very frustrated and very angry about all of these things, and I want to live my life. I want to be happy. I don't want to get angry and heated and sad and fill in the blank every time I think of how my person is not here, or every time I see that person's name in the news, or every time somebody asks something about my family member and I have to explain myself. Do I want to feel that indefinitely? I'm guessing the answer is probably no. But for some, that may be the case. And if that is you, you may just consider what that means for you. What does life look like for you if you're having difficulty forgiving someone or yourself for something that has happened in the past? And what is it actually doing for you? Is it helping you? Is it doing something for you? Or is it holding you back? So that brings me to there's an image online. If you type it in Google, I don't have the image with me if you're watching, but if you type in the unforgiveness hook, you'll see a fish hook. So for those listening, for those listening, when you think about unforgiveness, you think about a fishing hook. So imagine a hook, and if you've never gone fishing, there's a hook and there's a little, I don't know what you would call it, thing on the end that prevents the fish from just falling right off of the hook. I don't know what that special name is. I'm sure there's a name for what that piece is on the hook. It's what holds whatever it is that you're trying to get on the hook there. So imagine, you and your unforgiveness are the hook, okay? And you are trying to forgive somebody, but you are on the hook with the person you're trying to forgive. And maybe that's you, but in this example, we're going to use somebody else. So we'll use the example of the person who murdered your family member, right? You're on the hook with that person, and you can't get off the hook unless you let the other person off first. But everywhere you go, you're carrying around the other person and the hook. You're traveling around with this hook and this person all the time. You're stuck together, and it's painful, right? If you were to be caught by a fishing hook, for anybody that has been, it's probably pretty painful. But in order to get off the hook, you have to let the other person off first. So the cost of not allowing the offender off the hook first is said to be a lifetime of unhappiness, right? You're probably pretty unhappy if you're carrying around this burden all the time. Now, when you do let them off, does that mean that all of your pain is gone? No, it doesn't. In fact, you'll probably be left with a scar. So if we're thinking literally, if you've been hooked by a fishing hook, in your leg, you're going to have a scar there. You're probably going to need stitches and treatment, and it may be a little sore for a long time. Hopefully you don't experience pain there forever, but now every time you look at that spot on your leg, you're going to see that scar. And that's kind of what life is like when we are trying to forgive. We have those emotional, mental, maybe physical scars from what has happened, and we are working through that forgiveness and trying to let the pain go that is associated with that scar. So I can look at the scar on my leg from the hook, but that doesn't mean I have to experience the pain from the hook anymore. That's what we're talking about with forgiveness, is being able to let go of the emotional attachment to something, but not forgetting the memory, not forgetting that those things happen, and not saying that that memory has to be in the forefront of your mind and something that you think about all the time. We don't want that either. We want it to be something that you can recall, but not something that is going to bring you a bunch of pain. Now, does that mean that some misconceptions when we think about forgiveness? Does that mean that you only forgive somebody once and then we're done? It's over with? No, actually, semi-recently heard, I think it was a sermon, it was on social media, and they were talking about the idea of forgiveness, and that, forgiveness is not a one-time thing. So when we talk about forgiveness and we say, maybe it's time you forgive so-and-so, or maybe it's time you forgive yourself for whatever it is that you're holding on to, it may not be that one time. Okay, I've forgiven it and I'm moving on and I'm never going to be hurt by it again. No, you may have to forgive over and over and over and over and over again. You may need to work on that forgiveness, just like we work on coping skills, just like we work on improving different things in our life. If you've given up something, a bad habit like sugar, you may have to really work at it. You may eat sugar and then realize, oh, I did that. Okay, I'll try again, and I'll try not to eat it, or I'll find better options. The same thing happens with forgiveness, is we try to live our lives, but then that reminder is going to pop back. Those feelings are going to pop back, and they're going to start to overwhelm us. And we remember, I'm working on forgiveness. I'm working on letting that go, those emotions. I'm working on taking that heavy backpack off, the backpack that I'm carrying that's full of rocks. I'm working on taking that off, setting it aside, putting it on the shelf where I can still see it. It's there, but I'm not carrying that physical burden anymore. Because when we carry around that stress and that burden, it can cause physical problems for us. That stress can cause a domino of effects on our physical body as well as our mental and emotional health. So it really is a good practice to work towards forgiveness. So a really powerful story I wanted to share with you was something that I learned. I don't remember actually when I learned this story. It's been a long time, but I was reminded of it recently. And whenever I talk about forgiveness, this is a piece that I constantly remember, and I share this, and many people haven't heard of it. So there was a woman named Eva Kor, Eva Mozes Kor, and she was a twin. She recently died, I think, in July 4th, 2019. And she was a twin in the Holocaust and during World War II, and she was a twin that was experimented on by Dr. Mengele. So if you don't know anything about the Holocaust or Dr. Mengele, he was a doctor at the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he would do experiments on twins to see, what medical procedures worked, how they worked, what, would cause what kind of damage to twins. And he wouldn't use things like anesthetics, and he wouldn't, treat infection, and he wouldn't do those things because he didn't care. So it was very horrific, very bad situation. So Eva and her sister came out of that alive, her twin sister Miriam. And along the way in her path, she really focused on forgiveness. And there came a point in time where she decided to forgive all the Nazis. And that was a really big thing. I know from what I recall, her sister was unable or, didn't want to, but did not forgive the Nazis as her sister Eva had. Eva forgave the Nazis, and that was part of her thing. That's part of what she would educate about. That's what she would talk about, is forgiveness. She didn't want to hold on to that burden that I was talking about. She didn't want to carry that around. Yes, it was horrific, and yes, it caused problems for her and her sister and many who were experimented on, and probably had some lifelong reminders and triggers and painful experiences. And she focused on being able to forgive and share that message with the world, to share her story. So I think that's just a really powerful story in a way that we can think about forgiveness, that even the worst of the worst can be forgiven, because ultimately forgiveness is not about them. Yeah, you heard that right. Forgiveness is not about them. Forgiveness is about you, right? As we've been talking about, it's letting go of resentment and anger. Forgiveness is about you. Forgiveness is about letting go of the pain. Okay, you deciding for yourself that I don't want to carry this around anymore. I want to let it go. And again, you may have to repeatedly do it. You may need to do it over and over again, and over time it may get easier and easier and easier to do, to a point where you don't need to do that anymore. But it is about you, and it's okay. It's okay to forgive yourself. So oftentimes we think about forgiveness as forgiving other people for something they have done to us, how they have hurt us. But it's also about you forgiving yourself for something you have done or not done, said or not said. It's okay to forgive yourself too, and let go of that pain that you're holding on to because of whatever those things are. You may forgive the whole world, but you're still holding on to that yourself. It's going to be difficult for you to move forward and for you to relieve some of that bodily stress that you're holding on to. Forgiveness, as I said, is not for somebody else. It does not mean that you have to stay in something, right? So you don't have to stay in the friendship or stay in the relationship because you've forgiven somebody. Sometimes we forgive and then we move on, right? So if somebody cheated on you, for example, you may decide to stay with them, work through that, forgive them, begin to trust them and reconcile, or you may decide we're going to part ways. I forgive you. However, this isn't going to continue to work. I'm not going to continue in this relationship with you. That is also okay. You don't have to reconcile. Reconciliation is between two people, where two people decide to work on something together and forgive. Forgiveness is with one person. So forgiveness is about you. Reconciliation is about you and somebody else, or multiple somebody else's. So one other piece, or I found another, I guess, example, a quote by a Brad Hambrick. He gave an example like that's a financial type example. You know, so when we cancel a debt, when we cancel or forgive a debt, for example, it doesn't mean that it will never happen, or it doesn't mean that it never did happen, right? So if you cancel a debt, you forgive a debt, it's not saying that that debt didn't occur. It's just saying we are letting that go. So we're not trying to rewrite history. We're not trying to say that something didn't happen when we forgive. It's also not saying that you can't provide another loan, meaning trust. It's not saying you can't build trust with that person or that entity again. And it's also not saying that you can't go into business together, right? You can't reconcile. You can't do something together. You can do all those things, but you also don't have to. So forgiveness is multi-layered. It can be, and it can involve multiple people. It also doesn't have to. So let me know what you think about forgiveness. If I've missed something, if you think there are other pieces that would be worth talking about or sharing. These are just some pieces that I have found helpful when talking about forgiveness and be able to move forward and let go of pain and hurt and resentment. And I hope that you found this helpful today. And as always, I will see you next week for the Cultivating Calmness podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you next week.